Is Georgia like what we saw with Joe Burrow and LSU at the end of 2018? That's what Bill Connelly was asking the other day about the Georgia Bulldogs heading into this 2020 season. He was talking about the end of that 18 year, and I'm going to go pretty in depth about this, about Joe Burrow, JT Daniels, Georgia, and LSU, because there are certainly plenty of similarities, and there's also some question marks in terms of making that sort of comparison. Dean Legge from Dog Post, making you a smarter Georgia fan. And Bill Connelly was asking him just out loud, is Georgia going to be like what we saw with Joe Burrow and LSU in 2018? If you remember that time, then you remember that LSU lost to both Florida and Alabama that season. And didn't really look great at the beginning of the year. They had a 1-point win over Auburn. They had a kind of a beating of Miami to start the season, but they just really didn't settle down until the end of the year, kind of the later part of the year, where they scored 36 against Georgia, 42 against Rice, 72 against Texas A&M, and then 40 against Central Florida. These were all games where you could start to tell that Joe Burrow was coming into his own. When you think back about Georgia's end of the 2020 season, you had a transfer quarterback. JT Daniels really sprout up and become something that people thought he could be at the other institution. For Burrow and LSU in 2018, I remember this well. The week before they played Georgia, they lost an 8-point game in Gainesville to the Gators. It was a real fight. And Joe Burrow didn't look like anything overwhelmingly special. But as the season went on, particularly against Georgia, against Texas A&M, and in that game against UCF, those were all, well, the Texas A&M game was not a ranked win, but the other two were top 10 wins. You could tell that LSU was starting to figure themselves out. This was an LSU team that was picked 5th in the West and wound up playing in a New Year's Six bowl game. And you could tell they were turning the corner. And that's what people are wondering about Georgia right now is, what we saw at the beginning of 2020 is not going to be what Georgia is in 2021. That's pretty clear. The quarterback situation is settled, and that's made a huge difference for Georgia and what a lot of people think Georgia will be like. But it was the play at the end of the year from Joe Burrow and JT Daniels that really did get the attention. I don't know that a lot of people thought that LSU was really going to start rolling in 2019, but at the same time, this was a time where you could tell that Burrow was picking it up. The big long run against Georgia in 2018, that was a game change. That was a game clinching play for LSU and Burrow in that game. So I think when you look back, I do want to go back and look specifically at the LSU game, the end of his season here for LSU, Joe Burrow. They really turned it on. The win against Auburn at the beginning of the season was an important one. Don't get me wrong. God, sometimes I hate looking up stats because all you ever get are giant, massive, loud advertisements in the middle of your just peaceful journey through the web. It's annoying. He really picked it up at the end of the year. The same way that JT Daniels just really sort of exploded on the scene. For LSU, it was more gradual. And of course, the year later for LSU, they looked good at the start of the season. No question. They were a top 10 team. They really outpaced Georgia Southern and scored a touchdown ahead of Texas to win that game in Austin. But their defense did not look good. That only came over time for LSU, but they were scoring points like crazy. The fewest amount of points they scored in 2019 was 23 against Auburn, and that was a really good Auburn defense, as you recall. They really were good, but scoring 63 against Oklahoma, but putting 37 on Georgia, putting 42 on Clemson, just absolutely bludgeoning Alabama's defense with 46. To score over 40 on Clemson and Alabama in the same season, maybe you didn't get 40 against Georgia and you didn't get 30 against Auburn, but those two teams have pretty good defenses too, and they just lit them up. So is Bill Connelly right? Is this one of these things where we're just going to have to see what happens, and we won't really know even after the Clemson game? We really won't know for sure what you're dealing with there, or we'll be able to tell right away. I mean that first game against Clemson is about as important an opener for both schools. I mean, when was the last time Clemson had an opener where you're like, they could lose this game? And you could say the same thing for Georgia. I mean, usually those games are the second game. In this case, they're just opening the season up. Clemson's played games the second game of the year, like against Texas A&M a couple times and Auburn. But this is a whole different beast that they're getting ready to deal with. And just the same way LSU in 2019 right away knew with Texas in that second game. But the challenge for Georgia and JT Daniels is, can they really explode the way that LSU did in 2019? Can they, when Clemson does it against ACC schedule, nobody respects it. And maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. But when you're looking at LSU defeating, I'm just counting real quick here. It looks like 7 top 10 teams in a season. That's crazy. And not only that, they didn't score fewer than 37 points. They scored 23 against Auburn. The second lowest was the 37 against Georgia in the SEC championship game. I mean, they were just scoring left and right. And that's what Bill Connelly's asking is that what we should be expecting? Like, are they going to take it to that stage? Should we be like getting extra power for the scoreboard? Are these guys going to be that good? Because when you look at Georgia, man, it's not like they're perfect here. I mean, you still got to deal with the offensive line, an offensive line that is got a lot of starters back, no question. But they weren't killing people in the Peach Bowl. Yeah, that's a good Cincinnati defense. Is it better than Clemson's? Is it better than Clemson? I don't know. Because they struggled in that game a lot. And that was JT's worst game of the season, for sure. He did not play well. And he certainly didn't play as well as he could play. But it's a question to ask. Is that where we're going with this Georgia offense? I mean, just to even be mentioned like that is quite a comparison. I mean, Joe Burrow, this guy was probably had the greatest single season for a quarterback that I can remember in college football. And try not to be hyperbolic on here, but that was a good Georgia defense that they scored 37 on. And he, that was just Georgia. And they scored 42 on Clemson and 46 on Alabama. They were really running up and down the field on those guys. So is this the turning of the corner? Was that what Bill Connelly's talking about? At the end of the year, where Georgia scores 30-plus against Mississippi State and 40-plus against Carolina and Missouri before the final drive to win the game in the Peach Bowl. Every year, you're going to have games where you're going to have to dig it out. And then that 19 LSU team, that game against Texas was a fight. They really had to dig that one out. They won it on the road by a touchdown, but that was a fight. I'm telling you right now, their game against Florida, which they won by 14, they pushed that one out, winning and going away. And then the 3-point win over Auburn was just really a fight. They had to hold Alabama off, if you want to put it like that. But they blew Alabama out in many ways, and Alabama kind of tried to make a comeback. But, 27-point win over Georgia. What was that, 20? I'm having to get the calculator out. It's so these scores are so lopsided. 5-touchdown win over Oklahoma. What in the world? And then a 17-point win over Clemson. If Clemson doesn't get off to a hot start, LSU scores. They score 50 for sure. But, LSU didn't, Clemson didn't do much of anything after that first quarter against LSU. You could feel the game going away, but, is that what we were talking about with the Cincinnati game for Georgia? Some people have said to me privately, maybe that game was more important than we thought. Maybe that Peach Bowl matters more looking back on it. I don't know, I mean, everybody that played in that game essentially is coming back. You got a couple of guys that played in that game that still decided to leave, but not many. Zamir's back, James Cook's back, JT Daniels is back. The offensive line that started in that game is back. So the offense is back that you saw. You're going to need to settle down left tackle and take it from there. But is Bill Connelly right? Is what we saw at the end of 2020 what we saw at the end of 2018 for LSU? That's a heck of a question. I'm not sure I know the answer. Join me over at dogpost, DAWGPOST.com. We'll talk about this some more.